The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by Real Estate Revealed with Randy Barcella, Sunday mornings starting at 8.
Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. We're coming to you live from Gatto Industrial Platers on the west side of Chicago, part of our AM 560 Signature Bank Business Tour. President Trump on with Sean Hannity last night, wide-ranging interview, and of course including a discussion of the administration's response to the coronavirus. And here's what Trump had to say.
We're doing a great job. We have a great group. Mike Pence is doing a fantastic job. I put him in charge of the group, and we have the greatest doctors in the world. We're also helping other countries. We help a lot of other countries. We would even help Iran if they wanted. They're hit very hard. But we're helping a lot of other countries.
So President Trump, relatively optimistic about the administration's response, as you would expect him to be, trying to offer somewhat of a calming effect as we continue to yo-yo in the marketplace as sort of an indicator of people's yo-yoing anxiety.
Yeah, well, we had the 11th death, the first death in the state of California. That was a man, 71 years old, underlying health conditions, and he had recently gotten off a cruise ship. And now the 2,500 people that are on that cruise ship, which is a different cruise than he was on, now they're being tested before they could dock anywhere.
Speaking of cruise ships, interesting piece by Jeremy Samuel Faust, and this is the second time in a week that there's been an op-ed at Slate.com that's made sense, which is rather striking. But hey, I'll look for common sense wherever I can get it, and data and expertise. Dr. Jeremy Faust is at Harvard Medical. He points to the Diamond Princess data, the other cruise ship in question, as important with respect to the lethality of the virus. He said of the 3,711 people on board, at least 705 tested positive for the virus, which, considering the confines, conditions, and how contagious the virus appears to be, is surprisingly low. Of those, more than half are asymptomatic, while very few asymptomatic people were detected in China. This alone suggests a halving of the virus's true fatality rate, the discussion of the fatality rate being at like 2 to 3%. He suggests it's actually much lower. He also suggests that coming in with a high number in the early stages of a viral spread is not unusual, and then that tends to track back as you have a public health response. For more on this topic, let's talk to another expert. Why don't we? Because I would like if everybody who is engaged in fact-free hysterics would calm the blank down a bit. So perhaps Dr. Robert Citronberg can help us. He is Advocate Lutheran General Hospital's Infectious Disease Director. Dr. Citronberg, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning.
Good morning. So I know we're not supposed to, be in heavy petting people that have tested positive for coronavirus and other such commonsensical approaches to quelling the spread of the virus in terms of what we can do individually. But how would you assess the public health response from the combination of experts like yourself to government officials, and what, if anything, more should be done at that level, the expertise and funding level that we're not doing?
Well, part of the problem is this is uncharted territory. So you can prepare all you want, but until you actually have an outbreak, you don't really know how to do it. We're finding that at both the government levels and even at local levels too. I think the biggest thing that has hampered our understanding of this epidemic is the denominator. We don't know how many people have been infected, and at least in this country, we've had a lot of difficulty getting people tested. As of last week, the CDC had only allowed testing on about 500 Americans, which is incredibly low. We've had some roadblocks with our health departments allowing the testing or authorizing the testing. And because of that, that does two things. One, we can't identify people in the community who might have the disease without symptoms, and we also can't identify what the denominator is. We can't calculate that, and I think that relates to what you were talking about earlier, the mortality rate. We don't have no idea what the mortality rate is until we know how many people have the disease. right now we have no idea how many people have the disease, but it's likely a lot more than we think. Now, I would look at that as good news in that the denominator is probably a lot higher than we think. Therefore, the mortality rate may be quite lower than we think.
So what do you make of, there's the glaring headlines, which foods to stock up on, shelves cleared in stores of hand sanitizer, Clorox wipes. I mean, are we hyperventilating here?
Yes, absolutely. So there is a mass hysteria, and I think a lot of that is driven by the fear of the unknown. I think the media is contributing to that. Over the weekend, I was scrolling through some news stories and a reputable news service, and the headline for the story was killer virus. Well, influenza is a killer virus. We lose about 30,000 Americans on average every single year to influenza, but we never hear influenza described as the killer virus. So I think part of it, the hysteria, is the fear of the unknown. Part of it is being driven by the media, and people are afraid. But the best way to handle that is to be calm, don't panic, anticipate that there may be temporary closures of schools and workplaces for up to a couple of weeks. Now, this is not a new concept in this country. Every single year, usually related to influenza outbreaks, you see some local schools and businesses closed to allow the epidemic to subside. In terms of what to stock up on, the only thing that I think is really important is to have an adequate supply of prescription medications just in case pharmacies are temporarily closed. In terms of hoarding toilet paper and bottled water, I really can't explain why that is happening.
Well, you know what I heard yesterday? So
I think you just did, actually.
I was at the grocery store, and someone was buying he filled up 3 carts full of bottled water. And I said, why are you doing this? He said, well, when this becomes a pandemic, the employees at the water reclamation plant aren't going to be able to get to work, or they'll be too sick to do their jobs, and our water is going to become infected.
Yeah.
Now, how crazy is that?
And he had just watched Outbreak with Dustin Hoffman, too. Yeah. I don't know if that had any influence on him.
But what about flying?
That's pretty crazy, and that's a reach, and I think we just have to be realistic.
Okay. What about flying? United Airlines yesterday announced that they're cutting 10% of their domestic flights, 20% of international flights. President Trump said it's safe to fly. Is it?
I think it's really a personal decision. So the truth is, if you're obviously you shouldn't go and can't go to areas where this virus is prevalent, which would be countries like Iran and South Korea.
I'll have to cancel my trip to Tehran.
In terms of safety of airplanes, you think, well, you're going to be trapped in an airplane with someone who might be infected with something. It turns out airflow in airplanes is not really too dangerous. The air is HEPA filtered and recirculated, so the risk of catching something airborne in an airplane is actually pretty low. The bigger concern in airports and airplanes is your hands. And what we know about this disease and many, many other viral illnesses is that they're sometimes more commonly transmitted by contact than they are by droplet, which is someone coughing or sneezing onto you. So you get it on your hands, you touch your mouth, your nose, or your eyes, and you can actually infect yourself. And that's why there's such a big push for vigilant hand washing, and that applies airports, airplanes. There are no medical reasons why you can't fly or shouldn't fly to areas where the virus is not present in any large amount. But I think people are anxious, and my advice is, if you're going to be anxious the whole time on your trip, then you should consider postponing it until a time when you're not going to feel anxious, because you really won't enjoy your trip.
Yeah, you might consider taking a logic class at the local community college, too. I wonder why there's not enough amplification of successful responses to date. And I just go back again to Taiwan, which, of course, the Far East, right there next to China. Taiwan isolated from international health organizations like the World Health Organization because of China. And Taiwan, has 42 isolated cases.
Wow.
And we've talked about on this show before, when they got word about this virus spreading, the same time China did, ostensibly, in December, they took decisive action. They informed the public every step of the way. They quarantined cases, individuals who tested positive, and provided treatment available or let the disease run the course. And this has been rather successful. Singapore seems to have done a pretty good job to date isolating this as well, and they sort of followed a similar protocol, even though they picked it up a little bit after Taiwan did. And I wonder, there's the China model and the Iran model, which is propaganda and lying and obfuscation, and then there's what Taiwan and Singapore, and I would say, generally speaking, the United States have done. And it seems to be, the response seems to be disproportionate to the effective response of government combined with public health experts.
Well, I mean, that's a really good summary, and I think that we do need to learn lessons from how this virus has been contained in other countries. And you mentioned Taiwan and Singapore, and they absolutely do stand out. I should mention that China got off to a really slow start, and they messed it up from the beginning. So there was essentially a denial of this epidemic in the very beginning in Wuhan, and by the time the Chinese government acknowledged that there was a problem, it was too late. It had already gotten out of Wuhan. Remember, Wuhan also is a major transportation hub in central China. It's like the Chicago of China, and so by the time they acknowledged there was a problem, the virus had gotten out probably to every corner of the world. But I will say this, that the number of cases that are diagnosed in China now seem to be going down every day. I think they have gotten a hold of it to some extent. They have used some draconian measures with isolation that actually does work. The question is, how well can we do it in this country? Well, we need our citizens to cooperate. I know there was one case in New Hampshire. There was a person who was under home quarantine and instructed to stay at home, but instead went out to some social events and violated the home quarantine right at Dartmouth, and that's disturbing. So we need our population to buy into this and to understand this is absolutely controllable and containable, but we need everyone's participation.
Wuhan is the Chicago of China, except Wuhan has better funded public sector pensions. That's the only difference. Dr. Robert Citronberg, he's the Advocate Lutheran General Hospital's Infectious Disease Director. Dr. Citronberg, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your insights.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You're listening to Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
I love my country and think that supporting the men and women who have served to protect our values is the least we can do. Hi, this is John Sloss. I'm a veteran and the owner of Basement Flood Protector. Since 1974, we've manufactured the highest quality products and provided unmatched basement waterproofing and sump pump service to the Chicagoland area.